going to start recording. And I would like to welcome you all to the SLATE data dashboard demonstration. And this is my good friend, Janette Derucki. She works at Reaching Across Illinois Library System, where she is are you the data research specialist? I
Yep.
looked it up and thought I would remember it. And
That's me.
she started this program, this SLATE data research project, like 2 years ago in January. And it was meant to be temporary. And then they realized that we can't answer this temporarily. It's an ongoing question. So now she works there and she does other data stuff too. So
I
welcome to
do.
that.
Thank
And
you.
please go right ahead.
No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the chance to be with all of you and share the data dashboard. This has been kind of a big milestone for this project that I've been working on at Rails. I'm going to go ahead and show it on my screen and I'll get started just talking a little bit about the project. As Leah mentioned, this is a project that began about 2 years ago. I was hired at Rails specifically to collect school library data for schools in Illinois because as the SLIDE project, which just wrapped up last fall, was collecting its data for schools nationwide. They realized that a lot of the data for Illinois schools was missing. And so a lot of different organizations, which you see in the lower left-hand corner of the dashboard, kind of got together, a little meeting of the minds to determine how it was best to approach this problem and resolve it and what we were going to do about it. So you may have heard of the SLATE project as referred to as the Rails School Library Data Project. We renamed it last fall. Again, in conjunction with deciding that this was an ongoing long-term kind of effort, we wanted to give it a name that represents that. And it stands for School Library Advocacy Through Education. We feel like this addresses our need to educate not just the public, but also school librarians, school administrators, and school boards about the importance and the work of school libraries. We've been collecting data through various means, surveys, the annual library certification process. Some of the organizations that you see in the lower left-hand corner of the dashboard contributed data that they had been gathering on their own. Specifically, ISLE and the Dominican I School both had their own data collection efforts that were happening, and they've been able to supplement some of the data we've gotten from the Illinois State Board of Education, and then the National Center for Education Statistics, and a couple of other publicly available data sources. And we're looking at data about staff, library collections, and library finances. And we're, always expanding what we're collecting, and I'll talk about that a little bit as we go through the dashboard. So this is the dashboard just officially launched yesterday, actually, so I'm really excited to share it. I will tell you it's a work in progress. So this is the first iteration. Hopefully it will develop and grow and evolve over time to include more information than what you're going to see today. But to begin with, when people come to the Rails website is where this is embedded from, or I do have a direct link that I can put in the chat, or I don't know if Leah will drop that in there for me. That would be great.
I will.
That goes directly to the dashboard. It's currently being hosted on Tableau Public. We hope to eventually embed it into the Rails website, so you won't have to go to a third-party site to view it. But for now, the short-term solution for us from a web development standpoint is to go ahead and host it on Tableau, which is the platform we use to create it. This is the page that you'll see first. I call it the landing page. And here's where we tried to include just a lot of information about why school libraries are important. School librarians that I worked with in developing this platform asked me to put in here, relevant links, things people will want to see. Kind of like when you come to this page, like, why do you care to view this? Unless you're a school librarian or someone who has a vested interest in school libraries, this data is important to everyone. It's important to community members, parents, students, educators. It's important to administrators, public librarians. Everyone has a vested interest in the resources that are available to students. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago where someone said that they thought that K through 12 education was the single greatest global problem facing America. And I was like, you know what? You're probably right. It is important to examine every aspect of education. So here's in the upper left, I've got just a couple of statistics and then some major bullet points of why school libraries are important. I'm hoping to really expand this section to include a lot more as I get better research evidence and proof to associate with those points. On the right-hand side is what I'm calling loosely the resource center. These are links to organizations that are tied to school libraries and school librarianship, specifically in Illinois. All 3 library systems are linked there. And then also, like, if you're interested in learning more about the ISBE school report card, the Illinois State Library School District Library Grant, there's links to that information as well. The middle is kind of where it's at on this page. The top part is where you will make your selection for which school or district that you're looking for information about. The bottom just provides kind of a basic overview of findings from this project. You know, through school librarians in Illinois have more than 300 different position titles. It's part of what makes it really difficult to identify school librarians in the schools where they work. The data about how many school districts and public schools and non-public schools there are registered with the state in Illinois. Staffing wise, 1,400 individuals hold a library information specialist endorsement, which is the standard for certification for librarians in Illinois. And then, so about 1 out of every 3 school library staff members has that certification. And then the little section to the right is about funding. We looked at the range of funding on a per student basis. This is for library expenditures only, and it ranges from just below 50 cents per student to nearly $400 per student. So it's a pretty large range. The average is about $17 per student, which is in line with the ALA recommended guidelines for highly effective school libraries. And then it goes through the median. 49% of districts spend $10 or less per student, and then 75% spend less than $20 per student. So it gives you an idea of kind of, you know, the priorities as far as spending goes. When you think about how much is spent to educate a student in Illinois, I think it's about $16,000 per year per student. You know, school library spending is just a very tiny, tiny part of that. So as I said, this is the center part here is where you're going to pick the school or district. I'm going to use Canton Union School District 66 for mine, but you can see there was a drop-down menu. You could type in any district name you wanted to search. You'll click View District Details. It's going to take you to what I call the district view. So this is a district overview. The information at the top comes from ISBE. It's just, you know, how many schools do they have? What's their district enrollment? Is it a public school, private school? Do they belong to a regional library system? And then the schools and locations that are in that district. Below that is going to be their staff overview. So this is position details. This is going to be all library staff. These are in full-time equivalents. So it basically represents if a position is a full-time employee, it would represent the full-time equivalent is a 1. If it's part-time, it's going to be less than 1. So this is where you get an idea of actually how many full-time staff there are, even when there might be multiple people working part-time positions. So you have all district library staff, certified library information specialists, and then other library staff. The certified library information specialist is what I was mentioning before. This is someone who is a professional, or I'm sorry, is a licensed teacher and has completed 18 hours of coursework in library and information science and passed a subject matter test to earn that endorsement from ISBE. So anyone, for our purposes, we categorized anyone who doesn't hold that endorsement as other library staff. This could be someone who calls themselves a librarian. It could be a district librarian. They can have a lot of different titles, but if they don't have this endorsement, they'll go into this category. This is the total number of positions. So you'll see they have 7 full-time equivalent staff members, 11 different positions. And that's because they have a district librarian who works in all 5 schools in their district. So her position gets split up and divided among those schools. And you'll see that when I go to the next view where we're looking at building specific information. It also then below that goes into the highest level of education for each staff member. So this is anywhere from a high school diploma all the way up through a doctoral degree. And then when you mouse over this pie chart, it kind of gives you the full-time equivalent for each one of those categories. This middle chart looks at people who have library and information science education specifically. And then here's just another little information and a link to ISBE for people who want to know more about certified library information specialists. The right side of this screen talks about library collections. This goes into whether they conduct an annual inventory. This would be for every school in their district. the number of print books they have on hand, the number of ebooks they have on hand, and then any databases and subscriptions that they purchase. This is probably the area of data that we have the least knowledge of. So like it's hardest for us to collect this information. When we get it, it's usually through annual library certification. It is only provided at the district level. And I will tell you, like, as much as everyone is being really cooperative and participating in this project and doing their very best to give us good data, there are a number of people who acknowledge that they are just guessing when they provide these numbers. Like they're not really going to their ILS and looking at, you know, what the actual numbers are. They are really just estimating. They're not sure. And then to know how it would break down by building is next to impossible without getting that specifically from each building directly. Below that goes into library finances. When I was developing this dashboard, I worked with a team of 21 school librarians throughout the state, and it was really important to them that this be represented on a per student basis, but they also wanted their budgets to be represented in a category and not a specific number, because they didn't want people to be able to view this dashboard and immediately be able to say, well, I know what your district enrollment is, and if I know you spend $12 per student, I can tell you what your budget is. So what we did was we created these 9 categories and so each district and or private school will be placed into one of those 9 buckets based on their spending level. And you'll see this district is a level 5, and you go to the chart on the right, and that means they spend between $10 and $14.99 per student for library expenditures in their district. That level happens to be where this $12 to $15 per student range lies. So I can't tell you if they're within the range or just in it without going to look at their specific data. But we thought that that was a good way for people to get an idea of when they're comparing their school to another school, if their spending is approximately similar or not. This does link to that article about highly effective schools that I mentioned before. There's several different characteristics that those highly effective school libraries have, and the ALA has published I think it's just like a blog post even that lists all of those items. Below that is information about the Illinois State Library School District Grant. If you're not familiar with this program, it is if you are a library system member and you have a staffed library, I think staffed 15 hours per week or more, then you're eligible for funding through the state library. It's an annual application. It always happens every year in the fall. This year, you will also have to be in compliance with Public Act 130. Is it 130-100? I'm going to get the number wrong. 103-100, and to say that you adopt the ALA Bill of Rights or that you're in compliance with the book banning bill, as everyone likes to call it. This school is not a merit-based grant, so this bar chart at the bottom really just shows the amount of funding that the school district receives through this grant. The yellow line represents the minimum award. So any school that applies for this award, because it's based on enrollment, it's awarded at 88.5 cents per student. The minimum amount any district will receive is $850. So if you have an enrollment below about 900 students, you'll be awarded the minimum. Anybody who has 900 students or over is going to end up earning more. You'll be paid on that per student basis. It's important to note, just for perspective, that 49% of the districts that receive this grant do receive the minimum award. So that tells you that while the majority of school districts in our state do receive this grant, most of them are fairly small, right? And $850 is not a lot of money. And I was actually just talking with someone who is a retired school librarian, and she's like, they haven't raised that amount yet. So apparently there's also a movement among school librarians to hopefully increase the minimum award, because $850 in 2024 does not really buy you what it did, 5 years ago. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm not sure that there's a formal movement just yet, but just know that that's definitely something that people are thinking about. Does anybody have any questions about this screen before I move on to the next view? All right. Then we'll just keep on going. So you'll use the buttons to the left to view whether you wanted to go back and pick a different district, or if you want to view details about the buildings in this district, you click this top button. This brings you to a list of the schools in the district, and then also just the carryover of the district details that are the same from the previous screen. I just thought it was nice to have on this view, so you don't have to keep going back and forth, like how many schools did they have? How many, what was this? You'll pick one of these buildings, and then the rest of the screen will populate. So you're going to view only information about the district or the school building that you choose. In this case, I chose Canton High School. Here's just the location, the county, the grade served. This is the locale type that's determined by the National Center for Education Statistics. This is where you're going to be able to know, like, am I comparing my school and or district to a similarly situated school or district based on that classification. It also tells you if they're part of an LSAP. So anybody who participates in any of the Rails consortia or the Share consortia in Heartland, that would be listed here. If it's not affiliated, it would say unaffiliated or standalone. So then you would know that it does not participate in a shared catalog. This bar chart to the right is student demographics. For now, this just includes information from ISBE about race and ethnicity. We looked at the breakdown by building, by district, and then for the state. So you can kind of see how it compares to those metrics. Eventually, I would like to expand this middle section to include more information about student outcomes and other things that are important. I'm hopefully also planning to include information about public library access so that we can look at overlap of support and services in those areas. The rest of this screen pretty much deals with library staffing. So there's a couple of different things going on. At the bottom left is the detailed library staff position information. So for Canton High School, there are 2 library staff members that staff that school. Here's the district librarian that I mentioned before, and you can see that they are split up into, they serve this school 2/10 of their time. So she actually serves every school in her district evenly. So all of them will have that same 0.2. This position is a library filled by a library information specialist. So that certified librarian that I was talking about before. They also have a full-time library clerk that is not certified that works in that building 1 FTE. So full-time just in that single location. To the rest of the content is about the evidence-based funding model that ISBE provides. And so I'm going to start kind of at the top right to talk about this just because it kind of makes more sense that way. This is something that a lot of people in the state and even school librarians or any educators are not as familiar with. This is a funding model that's based on legislation that was passed in 2017 that talks about the provision of core personnel for schools throughout the state. And so there's these little hover dots that I've created that give you some of the basics about this funding model. Just what is it? What are the basics? What's included? The adequacy targets, that's how they determine a district's ability to fund the staffing model. The percent of adequacy is going to be how they determine which percentage to the extent which a district could fund the formula themselves. And then this core personnel one, which I want to kind of highlight because this includes all the staff that ISBE has determined are essential for a baseline education model for students to get a quality education in schools in Illinois. And librarians and library aides are included in this. Below that is the recommended staffing level that ISBE has set for librarians and library aides. And this varies based on which education level you're at, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school. The first column gives you the librarians. So for elementary and middle schools, they recommend 1 full-time librarian for every 450 students. So if you have a school that is smaller than 450, you would still have one. There's no part-time recommendation. It's going to be 1 full-time staff member is always the minimum recommended. And then for high schools, it goes up to 1 full-time librarian for every 600 students. For library aides, it's the same across the board. It's 1 library aide for every 300 students, and it's going to follow that same minimum. So if you have a school that has 99 kids in it, the minimum would still be 1. Below the 2 charts at the bottom show the current staffing levels compared with what is called for by that evidence-based funding model. So we thought this was really important as an advocacy tool because this is where, you know, a lot of people think you have a school library, you need one librarian, regardless of how many students you have. But the state is saying, you know, really that's not true, because based on the size of the student body, the population you're trying to serve, the number of resources you might have to manage because of the education level you work at, you're going to need more assistance and more support than just, you know, a single individual manning a library. So what this top bar shows you the total FTE that's currently staffing this school. So it's 1.2 librarians, or 1.2 staff members, let's say it that way. The recommended would be 3.15. And the recommendation is calculated using the average of the previous 3 years attendance. So then the next bar goes to the certified library information specialist. Currently, they have 0.2 of a FTE, and it's recommended that they would have just over 1.05. Other staff, they currently have 1 full-time staff member, and then they are recommended to have 2.1 additional staff members. So they're fairly close. I mean, as far as some go, like there are a few that I've seen that are vastly off. They'll have 2 staff members, and the formula will call for 11. So it's, there's a huge gap there. This one's a little bit closer than most. This chart over to the right, this table is color coded to match the bars, but it really is the exact same information, just laid out differently, because people process things very differently. And so it's just another way to look at it side by side instead of one above the other, to see, you can see all the current staffing levels in a row and then all of the recommended staffing levels in a row. This is it for the dashboard for now. Does anybody have any questions about this view or anything else you'd like to see that specifically?
I just want to say I put a new link into the chat to the dashboard, because the first one, I think it was similar, but it's not the same one you're showing. So I had a confused person, but that new link is in there now.
Okay, well, I'm sorry about that. I
No, that was
apologize.
my fault. I pulled the old one out of my emails. So there we go. I took it from the Rails website now. So it's the most recent one.
Perfect.
I got a question.
Yes.
So some of this data that's in, particularly this chart that I'm seeing now, is coming from the EIS system in Iowa's?
Yes.
Okay.
So anything that I get from ISBE is typically pulled from the last school report card, which is going to be published, and those are publicly available through the ISBE website. Some of it is going to be verified using ELIS, so like people's certification status, things like that. A lot of it is directly reported to us by school districts. So some of it's self-reported, and then we just verify it later.
So, and the reason I asked that question is because in my experience, and I've worked at 3 school districts, the certified library media specialists, which it's me here, they don't always report me in EIS as the district media specialist, nor do they divide my time out among all of the schools that I represent. And so my bigger question is, should I talk to my central office to make sure that I'm being divided out that way, or is that to my disadvantage? And is that something that we should be communicating with our superintendents in a larger type of information? Like, this is really good information. I'm just worried about how all the EBF and the FTE are going to come together.
What does it all look like, and what does that mean for you at the end of the day? Is kind of a hard thing. So, okay, so let me preface my answer by saying, like, our goal is definitely to advocate for school librarians. So we don't want to create a situation either in this dashboard or in this project where you're suddenly having to defend your work or your allocation, or, in any way, shape, or form that would jeopardize your position, right? So, but that being said, I do hope that access to this information is going to make school administrators more aware of the overextension of their staff members, because I mean, we do have several school district librarians, and one said she works with 15 different schools. Like, how do you quantify that? Her time looks minuscule. And when she tells me that she primarily works in the high school, so like a quarter of her time is dedicated there, and 14 other schools share 3/4 of her time. So that gets even smaller. And I think when you view it that way, like, when you pull up Canton High School and you see that the district librarian is there 2/10 of the week, you're like, that's hardly anything. Like, what does she even do in 2/10 of her time? And then to think about someone who's, I don't know how many schools you're overseeing, Michael, but 3. Okay, so that's still a lot, right? I will tell you the project, and I haven't put this on the landing page yet, but I do want to add it, is 20% of librarians in our state work in more than one location. So to me, that's a large percentage of people covering multiple buildings. And I think that that's something that administrators need to be aware of. For you, you will still represent your position as one FTE. The thing that we're going to ask moving forward is, and I'll talk a little bit about how the data collection for us is going to change, is that we are trying to get a better handle on those people who are covering buildings, in like multiple buildings, and what kind of coverage you provide. Like, are you in one building half the time and the other one's a quarter of your time? Are you, what does that look like for you, so that we can represent that well in this dashboard? For your district, I think they're always just going to consider you one full-time employee. They're going to look at what your contract is. Are you like a 10-month, 12-month, whatever? That was a suggestion that some school librarians have asked to have added to this in future iterations, is to look at the status of the employee contract, not just are you a full-time employee or not. Like, do you work every day in the school calendar or not? Like, some people are there 10 months, some people are there 12 months, some people are 11. So it just depends. All those positions differ so much. And my question to them when they posed that was, I was like, is that something that you really think about regularly when you're comparing your position to another? And they were like, yes, we do, because it's something that you really do have to think about in the scope of like how you're serving students. So I don't know if that answers your question very succinctly, but like, I do want to encourage you to always make it clear when you're submitting information about your position, make it clear which schools you're serving. And if it's more than one, like, you want to point that out, maybe not in a way that's, like confrontational, but definitely assertive.
And that's a good point, and I think I'll be conscious of that going forward. And then I don't know how this how unique my position is, but I also take on roles that aren't the librarian. Some years I actually teach, and so then my FTE gets divided out even more. So
Right.
it's just something to think about, like, how are we communicating what we want that to say, and how to be consistent across the state with that.
And that's something that we're definitely working toward, because when we noticed that there was a gap in this school library data, one of the main goals for this project is to find a way to build a bridge to the State Board of Education to make sure that this doesn't keep happening. Because as I've been working through this project, like, I continue to go back to the data that's in the NCES, which is what the state is reporting to the federal government, and it's still wrong. Like, a lot of it is still missing. There are schools where we know there are librarians, that librarians aren't being reported, and we don't really know what the reason for that is. So whether it's ISBE needs to get a better handle on who actually are working as school librarians and who they're reporting as school librarians, or we need to create a different system for how that's represented. You make a good point about people who share their time with other positions. There's a lot of that happens in libraries. And I think, like, primarily we've been collecting information through annual certification. That's why when you go through this dashboard, most of the districts that are well represented are either members of Heartland or Rails. So that's where we're getting the most reliable information right now. But I think, this is the first round, the third round of data collection through certification. And this is the first time where I'm starting to see more librarians reporting that they are the district librarian, but only 3/4 of their time is spent in the library. And they're getting a handle on how that actually looks on paper. Instead of just saying, I'm a full-time employee and I'm the librarian, it's like, well, I am a full-time employee, but I'm a classroom teacher for, a quarter of my time. So you want to make sure that you're accurately representing that. When we are collecting data going forward, we're going to move away from annual certification, just for the fact that Right now, we're mostly collecting data, like I said, about people or the agencies that are system members and not so necessarily about people who are working in schools that are not. And we would like to have a better, more complete picture of what this all looks like. And we also would like to collect more information about what's happening by building. So it's possible that you, as the contact for your district, will get, a survey that we're going to create that's going to become an annual kind of data collection tool that's going to gather more information at the building level to say, like, who's staffing this school each, not I don't want to say every minute of the day, but like in a better way represented to say, like, if you are the school librarian and you teach one period of the day, you'll be able to represent that in your numbers. Does that make sense? That was a really long answer to a very short question, but it was a good question. I appreciate that.
We have a couple questions in the chat, Janette.
Sure.
So one question is, how are the staff numbers populated? My district numbers seem off. And then I have a couple questions that are kind of relating to the same thing. And I think maybe we need to explain the difference between FTE and positions again, because we're saying we have 8 library positions. That is not correct. We have 5 employees, but I am divided into 4 buildings. That would show as 8 positions, just not FTEs, correct? Okay.
Right. So like, I'll go back to this page because this is for Canton Union School District. Like, I know they have 7 people working in their district. And like I mentioned, their district librarian works in 5 schools. So she gets added 5 times instead of just 1. So that's where this 11 positions comes from. Because if you took every school in their district and listed all of the positions by building, there would be 11 of them. This is something we're looking at trying to represent in a better way, because a lot of people get hung up on, like, there's not 11 people who work here, but it's like, well, when you look at how students are being served by building, there is a person there, they're just not there full time. And it's just the same person being split 5 different ways. So when you're talking about people versus FTE, when we're collecting our data currently, we are anonymizing everything. So I don't know who the person is staffing any building. You report to me that Smith Elementary School has 1 full-time library clerk. And I say, that's great. I'm so glad that they have a full-time library clerk. Thanks for telling me. I don't know if her name is Jane Smith, Betty, whatever. Like, I don't know who that person is. So if you tell me Smith Elementary has a library clerk half the time, and then Lincoln Elementary has a library clerk half the time, that might be the same person, but I don't know that because I've anonymized the data set. We're looking at possibly moving forward, asking for some kind of an identifier. So you would say like staff member number 1 or staff member number 2. That would give us a better idea of where there's people being duplicated into other positions instead of just guessing. Sometimes in very small districts, it's easier for me to spot them because people's qualifications come through. And if you've got 1 certified librarian in 3 buildings and their education is exactly the same, all of their informal training is exactly the same, sometimes you can guess like maybe that's the same individual, but I don't ever know for sure. And we want to keep it that way, to be fair, because this is publicly accessible information. We don't want to single out anyone. We don't ever want to create a situation where we're putting a library staff member in danger because somebody's going to say, oh, I know exactly who that is. You'll never see anyone's name listed on here, or their contact information. So I guess for me, it's like, I prefer it that way, although it would be nice to know exactly how people are being utilized. So that's where this staff member number 1, if you're the only librarian in your entire district, that's going to be a little bit easier for people to figure out. There's really no way around that. So I apologize for those situations. But so 1 full-time equivalent is basically like saying this is a full-time position. If the library is staffed full-time, it doesn't matter how many people it takes to fill that 1 full-time slot. It's still the equivalent of having 1 full-time librarian. If you have 3 people working 1/3 of the time, it's still 1 full-time spot. It's just held by 3 people. Does that make sense? Okay. Leah's nodding, so I'm hoping I'm at least in the right direction.
I've heard this like a million times though, so it took a while to get my head around. So
it is hard to think about. Like, you will, how do I want to say this? you can always have, like, the number of individuals filling an FTE can always be more. It can never be less. So if there's 7 full-time equivalent staff members, there's at least 7 people working there, because nobody can work more than 1 full-time position. I mean, I guess technically you can if you're working in multiple places, but that's going to be counted very differently outside of this. So that's something we have had to tackle, because let me just tell you, there are some school districts that report they have a full-time teacher who's doing library, they're the librarian after hours. How do you account for that, right? You know, like, so no one's really staffing the library. They're just doing administrative duties in there, you know, at night after they go home. So that's been a little bit of a challenge for us as well.
Here's an interesting question. And also I took the liberty of answering this for you. They say,
Okay.
Is Janette available by email for clarification? I said, yes, absolutely.
Yes.
But
Absolutely, for sure.
so one school employs a person as a library aide, even though they actually are a certified librarian, but the school doesn't recognize them as such, and of course is not paying them as such. So how do you think about reporting that?
So those people will be reported in this certified library information specialist total. So even if you're working and your position title is a library aide, let me go back to this building detail. And this obviously this says no here, but in the situation where you're a library aide that is certified, this would say yes. And if there was a clerk working at your school who's not certified, they would show up in a separate line that would say library clerk, no, 1, just like this one does. So your position would be listed library aide, yes, whatever your FTE status is, and then you would show up as 1 because you're just 1 position, even if it's not full-time. Or if it is, maybe you are, I don't know. But so that is already going to be represented in here. It's also going to be represented in this education number here. So you're going to know, like, this district does have somebody else who is has library science education. And I will say, you know, because you don't have to have a master's degree to get your LIS endorsement, this is just informational over here. I mean, yeah, it's nice to know who has a master's degree in library information science, but you don't have to have one to be a certified librarian. So to me, this chart is almost more useful, because this is telling you who actually has some kind of formal education and training to work in a library and to work in a school library. So this is going to be anybody who has any kind of just some coursework, up to, like, if you've earned an LTA, if you have an MLIS, some people have a doctorate in library and information science. So there's all different levels of education that are included in this chart. But this will tell you they have 2 full-time equivalent staff members who have education, and then they have 5 who do not. So I do think that's important. I want to go back to, I realize I didn't answer the question about the incorrect information that's in here. So the information that we have is being reported by the school districts, or through, like I said, we've done surveys. We've gotten information from ISLE as well as the iSchool at Dominican. They've had their own data collection projects, and they've shared their information with us. If your school incorrectly reports your staff information, we will incorrectly display it in this dashboard. We do our very best to vet and verify and validate all the information that comes in, but there's a good chance that some of it is not going to get double checked. Like, I will tell you, I know there's one school district in the rail service area that has 11 staff members. They only ever report their 4 library information specialists. Every single certification, aside, despite me knowing they have 11 staff members, they don't report any of their support staff. And I'm not really sure why. And I think some of that goes back to the inception of this project, where people were concerned that we were trying to, like, I don't know, like we were the library police, and we were trying to come in and see, like, who had a right to be there and who didn't. But that is absolutely not the basis for this project in any way, shape, or form. Like, we really want to just know who's working in your school library, what kind of training do they have, mostly so that for the state and the systems, we want to know how we can support you. Like, you know, the School Library Workers Symposium, which I'm not sure if any of you were part of, that took place last fall, like, that was a direct result of learning that there are 2/3 of the library staff members aren't certified. You know, we need to provide better resources and training for people who may not already have it. It doesn't mean that you are less worthy of holding your position or you don't deserve to have that job. It just means that we recognize that we could be doing more to support those people. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, it's quiet now. So
let's see. Is there anything else in the chat that I missed?
one just came through. My district has had a changeover in the unit office. Are the staffing numbers part of a report that they would submit?
So the staffing numbers are being reported currently through annual certification. If you're not the certification contact, or if you've never been part of that process, it takes place every year from January through the end of March. And right now, as part of that, schools are asked to submit their staff data. It's voluntary. They don't have to do it. It's part of what's making this really difficult for us, to be honest. And that's where they would submit that. They can always email me directly. I do want to point out that the information that's in this dashboard right now is already a year old. So because we're currently collecting information about this school year, this represents last school year. So if you've had a change even over the summer, it's probably not reflected in this dashboard just yet. This will hopefully get updated this spring, and we'll be able to reflect the new staffing situations that are going on. I am making changes as people are sending them to me, you know, hey, you don't have any information for my district. Here's the 10 staff members that we have. I would rather go ahead and push that through and then upload duplicate data later than to have nothing displayed for a district that wants to be included in this. If there aren't any more questions immediately, I'm going to go ahead and talk just a little bit about how we're using this and how I would encourage all of you to use it. We've talked a
Can I
little
ask
bit
one
about
more question real quick?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Before, because I think that's going to answer our next question, but one came through. Do you want if somebody sees like an out and out error, do you want to hear from them?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
I've already received at least one email with someone saying, I think this district's wrong. And I said, thank you for telling me. We fully expected that launching this dashboard was going to create an influx of information, because I think, like I said, we've had districts who have been kind of like picking and choosing what they've shared, that are going to realize like, oh, anybody can go to this and look at this, and we're not, you know, reflected accurately. And we want to make sure that we're representing ourselves in a way that's correct. So talking about advocacy, like I mentioned, this Illinois School Library Workers Symposium, that was one initiative that came out of this. But so we are looking primarily at, do schools have libraries? Like that's the #1 question. And, you know, sadly, not every school does. Do schools with libraries have library staff? Also, not a given. There are plenty of schools that have a library that kids just are not supervised. It's not, the collection is not being managed in any way, shape, or form. When you're looking at education, training, and qualifications, that's also the advocacy piece of us trying to support school library workers. But then we're also looking at the resources used and the access to resources to determine how we can better support schools in that way. So I know we're all kind of anxiously awaiting the statewide database package that is I think the RFP has been sent out for that. It's going to happen this spring. We're going to hopefully get more information about which databases will be included in that from the state libraries. But, you know, I think that that's going to be a big game changer for schools, especially. So a lot of it will determine, like, will you be able to use funding to purchase other things? Is it going to give you access to resources you didn't already have? Like, what kind of impact does it have? So that's an important thing for us to look at. As far as your use of this dashboard, I think one, it just gives people a better understanding of what's happening in their school, like kind of in totality. It gives you a large view, like big picture view of your school, and kind of puts it all like together for you, for your administrator, for your school board, for a parent. You know, those are all people that might be interested in viewing this. It's going to enable you to make some comparisons between your school and or district to others in your area, or those, you know, everybody has those other buildings and districts that you kind of compare yourself to over time, like as a benchmark. So it's going to give you the ability to do that. And that's something that we're developing going forward, is looking at adding another screen to this that would allow you to make side-by-side comparisons, probably as many as 3 districts together. Someone requested that it was consumer report style, so it'll be like columns where you'll have a measure and you'll just be able to look at everything side by side, nice and clean. I've already had one school librarian contact me yesterday when the dashboard launched because she was looking at the programs and resources of the schools that feed into her school. So she wanted to look at knowing where the students are coming from. Do they have a certified library information specialist? What type of resources do they purchase? What do I need to be prepared to provide? Or like what, just be ready to handle when people come through the door? Are these kids who are all coming from a school that is going to have had some kind of a literacy program, or are they in a school that doesn't even have a library? You know, so those are all things that she can look at for the most part with this dashboard and get at least some idea of, you know, what she's going to be considering as far as preparing herself for students who are entering her building. Anybody have any questions about that? I know, I'm sorry, like I'm trying to like cram as much information into this as possible, but I also don't want to overwhelm you. So if anybody has more questions, please ask.
We're just having a side chat about whether this information goes out to like students in education who are not librarians. And I was talking about how, you know, administrators, especially to my knowledge, do not get any education in how important libraries are and how we're trying to combat that, obviously, with the Administrators Academy. So,
right. I will share with this group, like, I've had a couple of side conversations with someone at one of the universities in Chicago about how to incorporate that in the administrator actual, like the coursework that they get to obtain their master's for administration. And because she went through a very similar process trying to educate them about early childhood education. And she was like, I can talk to you about the modules I created. I can talk to you about like how to incorporate some of that. So Leah was mentioning the Administrator Academy, which is the PDH event, a one-day training about how schools factor into student learning, or school libraries, that is, and the importance that they serve. But this would be a similar kind of thing, but broken up into smaller modules that would be taught within a course that they have to complete in order to earn their credentials to become administrators. So it's just another way of tackling it, I guess, getting to them before they get out into the field versus waiting until they're already out in the field. Because going back to the slide project, that was one of the findings that I found most interesting about that project, was that they said there's not a lack of funding for school libraries. There is a difference in administrator priorities. So in areas where school librarians were not mandated to be certified in every school, they're usually administrators found something else to spend that money on. So hopefully there's a lot of things at play that Illinois could do differently. The money is there, going through the evidence-based funding formula. Funding for librarians is being provided. The ISBE provides more than $300 million a year to school districts to meet that formula. And so if money is flowing to your school district, that it's discretionary. There's no requirement that they spend it for librarians. So it means that administrators in those districts are needing to spend it elsewhere, or they're just choosing to spend it elsewhere.
we have Lauren here. I'm gonna put Lauren. Lauren is saying Lauren works at the University of Illinois in school licensure for the librarian program, and she's confirming that yes, there's not a lot of education for educators about librarianship, but it's something that she's trying to tackle for the future. So I'm so glad to have her in that role there, and I think that will be great. There's obviously, whenever I think about this, it makes me furious. I'm like, if you are an administrator of a school district, you probably have an advanced degree of some kind. So how did you do that? You had to have accessed some scholarly articles somewhere, and I'm just really, really curious about how they did it.
So I'll share a personal story. Leah's probably heard this a million times, because unfortunately for her, she gets to be in a lot of meetings with me. But my dad was a school administrator. So when yay me, he was the principal of my high school when I graduated. Then he went on to become like the superintendent of that district. So you know, I've asked him a lot of questions about this as I've gone through this project. I'm like, you know, what do you think about this? And he, you know, his first answer is always, I'm really glad I'm retired. Let me just start with that. And I'm, you know, he said it's really hard to decide some of the spending cuts. He's like, you know, there's also trends in education. For a while, the trend was to cut the fine arts. You cut the art program, you cut choir, you minimized your band. Maybe you only had a marching band and not a pep band, or only a concert band. You know, those were the things. And then there was a resurgence of returning the arts to education to make it a more complete experience for students. And so now that you have to cut something else, and he's like, I will tell you, they teach you to cut the library as one of the first things. First, you reduce the funding, and then you figure out, can they get these resources some other way so I can get rid of this position? And so I feel like that's a problem. Like, if they are actively teaching people to cut certain resources out of the school as a first course of action, you know, our duty, as especially as library systems, to support school libraries is to say, like, okay, we need to teach you why that's maybe not the best first course of action that you have. Like, you know, I'm sorry that education cuts are ever something that a school has to go through, but you know, there are some things that are used by every student in the school and in the district, and the library is one of them. I don't know that there's ever a situation where someone said kids got smarter by not having a library.
I think that needs to be our new tagline. Kids don't get smarter without a library.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
we're fortunate that there is a lot of attention. There's a big movement in support of school libraries, but it's brought about largely by the same movement that is against, you know, intellectual freedom and access to information. So it's like you're kind of fighting an uphill battle, but I'm hoping that this dashboard will be a tool to raise awareness. Like, I've had a couple of school librarians reach out talking about, like, how do I start a conversation with my administrator about this, and what's in it, and what our district looks like, and what our school looks like, and how we would like to be portrayed and represented to our community when they look at this dashboard. You know, because the reality is that we start out saying this is going to be for librarians and educators, and it's only going to take one parent, right, to find this, and then it's going to be everywhere. Like, that's just the way it works in schools. Parents are great information sharers, sometimes even when we don't want them to be. But you know, if there's someone who is outraged by what they see, then there's going to be questions, and I do hope that they ask those questions, because then people have to provide answers. Well, ideally they would provide answers. But as long as it's a constructive conversation, I think it's a great tool for that.
I think so too. I'm anxious for some districts around me to see this, some parents and districts around me to see this, this data. So.
All right, I think that's all I have. I mean, does anyone have any other questions? I know you've all probably had a very long day, and I appreciate you taking the time out to come and attend this, to take a look at it. I'm going to stop sharing the dashboard so you can just stop looking at that for a while and give you a little bit different view. But
I have envy of her bookshelf behind her whenever I meet with her.
You're very kind. But I mentioned before that we are making some plans for the future. Please, if you have any idea for information that is not represented here, or something that you think would be beneficial for you to have as part of this, I'm always looking for new ideas for what could be better integrated into the dashboard. And we're looking to include student outcome data in as many different ways as we can. It's just been a challenge to get good standardized student outcome data across all the different types of schools that we're looking at. But that is a high priority for the next iteration of this dashboard, just because that's what people want to know, right? They want to know, like, do you have a library, and what do your test scores look like? Does it make a difference when you have that? You know, we're also looking at how we can better quantify the return on investment for library resources. You know, people are constantly talking about, like, you don't need library funding because you have Google. And it's like, okay, well, we all know that's not true. But how do you prove what the actual value of those resources is, and what it amounts to as far as, like, actual student achievement?
We have one comment just saying thank you for your work on this, because it's going to be so valuable going forward, and I completely
thank you.
agree.
I appreciate that.
So everybody who's still on, I put the link in at the beginning for PDH. If you need PDH, if you don't have that, let me know. I put Janette's email in the chat as well. And if you ever need it and you don't have it, you can find it on the website that if you bookmark the SLATE data dashboard, or you can always reach out to me and I can put you in touch with her. I have her on like the speed dial of my phone.
Oh, that's so nice. You're so nice, Kate. I really
Kate
appreciate
is
that.
like,
Thank you.
Kate said that
But
she was
thank you all.
coming today, and I said, "Oh, that's so nice." And she's like, "You and Janette make data fascinating," and I'm like, "Okay."
That's our goal anyway. We want
Yes.
people to not like run screaming the other way when they see the word data. But
Yeah.
there's so much you can do for your school library when you use data, like whether it's your staff data, collection data, circulation data, and you know, it's a very important part of the type of advocacy work that we're doing. And I'm hoping that there will continue to be an increased interest in it.
I hope so. I think so.
Make it
Your
funny.
live show at Iowa was
my.
spectacular. Maybe make it funnier though. Okay, we'll work on that. We'll bring some jokes. So I think
We'll
that's
definitely
it.
work on that.
We've passed the requirement for issuing an hour, so be sure to fill out the PDH form. And if you have any questions, let Janette know, or you can always contact me. And I thank you so much for coming here. And this will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel shortly, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And if you are looking for it and can't find it, just let me know and I'll be glad to get it back to you.
Yeah, thank you everyone
so
for
much,
attending,
Janette.
for all your questions and comments. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.